And if we move on to question number 4, should A1 shops, including ancillary floor space such as storage space, be protected at all floor levels in the designated shopping centres? And question B to that is, should commercial uses such as offices be permitted on the upper floors above shop-type premises in shopping centres, or should they be used solely for retail uses and housing?
The answer is yes.
Thank you. And is that to both A and B?
The reason for that is there's lots of buildings where, and we've worked with those, where some historic buildings, you just can't go to shopping over 3, 4, 5 floors. It doesn't work. And then if you look at how you adapt the building to put the residential in, also doesn't work. So the office use is, in fact, the logical conclusion. We've done schemes, for example, on Oxford Circus with exactly that issue. So I think that is probably the realistic way forward in most cases. I think in terms of also the environment, when we worked, for example, on Selfridges and we had a whole mixed-use debate, there's a lot of concern about putting a lot of residential over very high-intensity retail, sometimes 24-hour servicing. So you can also get some amenity issues if you put residential very close to very intense, some of the bigger retail facilities.
Okay. So in terms of your yes, and in terms of question A, do you think that on certain levels the retail floor space should not be protected, that there should be an allowable loss if it's on particular levels?
Yes, I do, and you've permitted it, and I think having that flexibility makes a lot of sense. I mean, because otherwise the space sits empty. We know buildings that have bits of retail on, say, 4th or 5th floors, they'll just sit empty, so one has to do something with it.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman down the front.
Just to support Hugh on that, the challenge for the retailers is on a lot of those stores or shops where the 3rd or 4th floor is vacant. It's often off a relatively small footplate. So retailers find it easiest to trade basement and 1st floor because it's only one stop for a consumer to move. The higher up a building you go, the bigger the floor plate tends to need to be. So it works for department stores, it works for some of the larger fashion stores that you'll see on Oxford Street or Regent Street. But if you go around most of your major streets, you won't find much retail outside department store use on 2nd floor or above. And also the types of retailers that will trade 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet at ground floor don't have enough variety in their range to fill up those other floors, even if they could get people up there.
And often what's apparent in those kind of retail units is that the legibility between the floors has to be by way of mezzanine, very, very expensive and space-consuming escalators and things like that, so that often on the Oxford Street stores I'm thinking of, you wouldn't necessarily know which floor you're on. It's not a perception that you'd have, whereas the smaller units, as you say, that would be very apparent if one's using an old staircase, for example. So.
And what about some of our town centres that fall outside of the central activity zone? We have, Harrow Road, or for example, or some of those other town centres. Does anyone want to put a view on the appropriateness of offices in those locations?
Before you mention that, I was going to suggest that the answer to these questions rather depends on which designated shopping centre you're talking about. The answers given in respect to the West End may make a good deal of sense for the special retail area, but for an area like Harrow Road, other areas where instead of dealing with buildings of 5 stories and more, there may only be 2 stories, or ground plus 1st and 2nd floor, something like that. It may be a very different answer, and the downside of mixing housing with retail may also be much less of a downside. It may be eminently appropriate in that sort of centre to have homes over the shop, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd suggest a case-sensitive approach.
Okay. Does anyone have any further comments against question 4?